Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the bridge. Sandy and I are starting a series today on the 5 stages of grieving and loss. I kind of just added that, but it's part of what we're doing. And so Sandy's going to give us a quote in a minute, and then we'll go through the stages with the PowerPoint, and then we're going to make the PowerPoint screen smaller, and we'll put ourselves more in the forefront as we kind of tell our stories. And then after today's episode, we're going to be inviting people that are part of the Bridge community. That means that they've already been on, or some that have asked us to come on to share their stories with us and talk about how they've experienced the stages. So, Sandy, good afternoon to you. And
Hi,
I'm thinking you might have a quote for us.
I certainly do. Uh, this is actually by Michael J. Fox. Many of you know who he is, and his life's trajectory changed uh, significantly, starting in his 20s. And his comment that I'm going to share with you today says, "Acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through." Michael J. Fox.
Oh, that's a good one. Very, very good one. So, Sandy, I'm going to let you kind of go through these stages. I will click the PowerPoints to move. How's that?
That sounds great. So I had come up with the thought that this might be a topic to share because all of us deal with some kind of grieving process in our life. And the first time that I heard about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was when my mom was dying, and this was for almost 40 years ago. And it was helpful to understand what the process is, but I thought we could make it even broader in the fact that it's not just about death and dying. It's about big changes in our lives that cause us to pause and deal with some of the emotions surrounding what we're going through. So the first step they talk about, that Elizabeth talks about, is denial. The next one is anger. The third one is bargaining. The fourth one is depression, and the fifth one is acceptance. So there's a real process here involved in coming to the point of acceptance of what your reality is now. So denial is when we're talking about the initial shock and disbelief when faced with loss. And one of the things that came to my mind when I was preparing for this is that there's the fear factor before you come to the denial. When you have some bad news coming down the road, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a fear that how am I going to handle that? And then I think that because it's overwhelming to accept what's happening, we can go into a denial. So this is the initial shock and disbelief when faced with loss. And the example is someone who's lost a loved one might refuse to accept the reality, saying this can't be happening. They may continue setting a place for them at the dinner table or expect them to walk through the door. That's somebody that you've lost through death or divorce. I mean, there's other things that can cause somebody not to show up. Anger is the next stage, or, those stages are not necessarily all in alignment. I mean, I think we go through all these different emotions at different points in times, and we can jump one and hit it back later, the steps that happen. Anger is the reality. As the reality sets in, feelings of frustration and injustice can emerge. For example, a person may feel angry at doctors for not doing more to save their loved one, or lash out at friends who seem to be moving on too quickly. The third one is bargaining. People may attempt to regain control by making deals or imagining scenarios where the loss could have been avoided. For example, someone might think, if only I had done more, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Or even they pray, promising to change in exchange for relief from the loss. Depression often happens on and off throughout this process. This is a deep sadness when the weight of loss fully sets in. For example, a person might withdraw from social activities, lose interest in things they once enjoyed, or experience feelings of hopelessness. It's like, Why go on? And then acceptance this is a deep sadness when the weight of loss fully sits in. A person may withdraw from social activities, lose interest in things they once enjoyed, or experience feelings of hopelessness. But the next step is that they are able to say, this is the reality of my life going forward. How am I going to deal with this? Trying to be proactive in the process. So grief is a process. It's deeply personal, and there's no right or wrong to process it. If you're someone you know is going through loss, know that support is out there. We're not alone, but a lot of times we withdraw when we're feeling pain and hurting. Grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim, and that's by Vicki Harrison.
Okay. So, Sandy, thank you for going over those. I heard you say that we don't necessarily have to go in order or even hit all the stages, that it just varies from person to person.
Right.
And why don't you start kind of with your journey? I'm going to kind of rearrange this screen here for us, but you go ahead and start. What was your
right up front? I want to say that I've had a blessed life. I've had wonderful things throughout my life that have been so enjoyable. I've been blessed. I have a strong faith, and I believe that through the tough times, I still have been carried over by my faith in dealing with tough things. When I was a kid, when I was in fourth grade, my parents divorced, and that was a tough thing for me because that was before divorce was as common as it seems to be now. And I remember having to adjust to that. After I turned 20, I got married when I was 20 years of age, and I had 3 babies, and that relationship ended in divorce. We'd been married about 8 years, and that was a loss of relationship. And one of the things that I did want to share while we're talking about this is that there's many faces to the pain of grieving. And that can be end of relationships. It can be change of employment. You could either lose your job or end up even shifting over to another job. And there's still a loss there. There's still a part of grieving that happens when you're leaving people behind that you have connected with and had a relationship with. Health changes. And we're going to be talking about that. Both Sue and I have things that are going on in our lives with our spouse, with us, that have changed our lives dramatically from what we thought retirement was going to look like. And so aging and changes of ability or capability and loss of community. Sometimes you end up being a part of a certain community that it just, things don't end up working out, and you hear of churches disbanding or things that have happened within a community that tear people apart, and there's a grieving process there. So I ended up at the age of 28, 29, losing my mom. She passed away, and during that process, I was going through a divorce, and I had 3 babies. I had a 4-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So there was a lot of pain and grieving around those 2 instances in my life. I ended up getting remarried a couple of years later, and Richard, my husband, and I have now been married 39 years, and we combined our families together. So we have 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. So we rebuilt. Again, we rebuilt after we both ended up having gone through a divorce. And, there's just things throughout the relation, through marriage. I mean, life happens and you have to work through it. And finally, we were getting ready to retire, and we were really excited about that. This is going to spend more of our time. My husband had been a nurse for a long time, for 40 years. And he had been working as a manager for an emergency room. And he had had to, in working in the hospital, he had to get his annual flu shots. When he retired, a year after he retired, and he had motorcycles and he was going to go across the United States and he was planning to do all kinds of cool things while I was finishing out my career, he started having tremendous pain and started stumbling and falling. And we finally ended up going to the University of Washington Medical Center up in Seattle, and they kept him for 10 days and ran all kinds of tests. He had lost 40 pounds in just 2 months. And we had all these dreams. We had property over in Eastern Washington that was like our getaway, a little cabin that we would go to and that kind of thing. And we just envisioned ourselves going back and forth and hanging with our grandkids and building projects with our children and finding ways of supporting them and being a part of their life once we had the time. Because when you're working full time, a lot of times you can't always be there when you want to be there. Well, the end result after he had been there for 10 days is that they came up with the diagnosis of chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. And what that is that the sheath of the nerve starts destroying itself. And the pain was tremendous. He even with his being on pain medication, he was dealing with 8 out of 10 pain. And it was a tough time. And it was a scary time. And when I talk about the fact that one of the things we deal with in the grieving process is the fear factor. We didn't know how he started losing his ability in his legs, and it started moving up, and they said we don't know how far up on his body it could go. It could even go up to his trunk part of his body, and at that point breathing could become an issue. So it was really scary times. And we brought him back home, and he ended up having to be in a wheelchair full time because he no longer could move around with and be safe. And we had to adjust all kinds of things in our house. Our house ended up having to have ramps built, and we were blessed in the fact that our kids and our friends rallied around us and helped us work through this and get things set up for him. But that's all a grieving process. And he had all these dreams that he had to let go. He ended up having to eventually sell his motorcycles, and we bought a city bus and tried to make it into a little camper so we could still go camping with our kids. But lots of changes. And he's learned how to be as effective as he can be. I mean, he had to depend on me for a lot of care that now he has kind of taken over for himself. He's figured out how to make it work so he can be as self-sufficient as possible. But man, he's been courageous. He's been an amazing guy, but he went through different stages of the grieving process too. And I remember when I was still working and I would say, do you ever, he was still dealing with so much pain. He ended up turning a corner where the pain was not like that anymore, but for quite a while he was hurting so bad. I said, do you ever just scream? And he said, yeah, I do. He says, there's times when he's by himself in the house and he just hollers out his feelings because he's dealing with not just the physical pain, but the psychological pain and the realizing of the fact that your life is changing dramatically. And it's not something you're going to heal from. You're not going to get better. So it was a change in our game plan. And now more recently, I had been dealing with a lot of fatigue. And I could tell that my gait when I was walking was different. There was just a change in who I was. I like to be a fun person. I like to be a sparky person. I like to kind of change, be a change agent. And I felt like I was losing who I was as a person. So about a month ago, I ended up getting diagnosed with Parkinson's. So these are things that you have to make adjustments. And you have to go through the realization that things are what they are. As Michael J. Fox said, there's got to be a way through. but the processing of it can be challenging. And I wanted to bring this out in our podcast and talk to people and share with people, because I don't think we talk about it very well in our society. I think we like the positive end of things, and I like to live positively also. But there's sometimes a lack of empathy or understanding of why we feel the way we feel or what's going on, or feeling guilty. So I felt guilty when I was frustrated with the situation that happened with my husband, because it wasn't just his life that was changing, it was my life too. And feeling the anger that wasn't even justifiable. It didn't even make sense, but you still feel that anger. Well, everything in my house is having to change, and we ended up selling our property in Eastern Washington, all these things. And it's not that person's fault, but it is a process you have to go through. And sometimes people from around, your kids or your family or the community, they don't understand it. They don't understand what it feels like to be a caretaker. They don't understand the changes that are going on in your head and how you're trying to encapsulate it somehow and make it work and go forward. So I thought it was a good conversation to have with people, because all of us have had to deal with dramatic changes in our life, and had to deal with the process of grief. And how can we do that and get on the other side of it?
So, Sandy, can you talk to me a little bit about, because I'm thinking that you have gone through waves of acceptance.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and talk to me about acceptance, and what are some of the intricate little points that come up when you've accepted it, and yet maybe you jump back into denying it, kind of how does it jump
It's
around?
a cycle.
Because you're yeah,
It's a cycle, because you want to think of things I want to put a positive spin on stuff, because I want to live my life intentionally in having the cup be half full instead of half empty. And sometimes you have to give yourself permission to feel that anger and to feel that frustration, and um, dealing with the depression of your reality at that point in time. And so, yeah, it's a balancing act. It really is. But you're correct in the fact that that cycle keeps coming back around, and you just don't go through it just this one way. You go through it, whoop, 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 whoop. You'll pop all over the place in regard to your emotion on how you're feeling that day. And there's days when you just feel grumpy, and you don't even know why you're feeling grumpy, but you don't have the patience that you want to have, or that you normally have. um, and sometimes you can't put a name to it, and I think that also can be challenging if you cannot. We want to label everything. Well, there's not always labels for what you're feeling, and you kind of have to process it and figure out, what am I going to do with this? And I do a lot of praying some days, because I don't feel like I can do things or handle things on my own. And in this Parkinson's thing that I just was diagnosed with, I knew something wasn't right for several years. And so putting a name on it that way, at least it didn't feel like I was being a hypochondriac, because I kept thinking I don't feel right. And you try to explain it to people, but it just starts sounding like you're whining. And so having that, knowing what that is, and we have hope that medications will make a difference, and that it will help me live as normal life as possible. But I don't think I've even wrapped in my brain. I mean, it was a relief to know that I had a diagnosis now, but it's not something you heal from. You don't heal from it. And so then you have to say, okay, well, how bad could it get? When you look at Michael J. Fox, that's a pretty scary thing when you see how he's had to deal with things and all that it's taken from him. Yet he has a spirit of continuing life and getting the best out of life that he can. And that he is a great poster kid, or poster human, for what to do under challenging circumstances with your health.
Mhm.
But I don't think I probably
Yeah.
even totally wrapped my head around what that means for me yet at this
Yeah.
point. And I think it's probably, I don't know, I may be in the process. I don't think I'm in denial so much. I don't think I feel angry, but I probably am doing some bargaining. And
Mhm.
there's some
Well, and
depression in that.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, you kind of being a positive person, and you are a positive person, and it's very important to keep your own mental um, outlook positive. And yet, there's some time you've got to have a safe person to bitch about.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
Not that you want to dwell there, but you know, there's probably people you don't feel comfortable complaining about. But it's not really whining. It's really um, cathartic to be able to share your feelings.
Mhm.
And maybe another person, you might want them to give you a different perspective, and you just might want to have them let you down, you
Right,
know.
right.
And when you're dealing with a spouse, somebody who's a caregiver or you're a caregiver, you know, that's not necessarily the person that you can dump on,
Right.
because then, you know, they've got their own issues.
Well, you
So
don't want to hurt
you have to
hurt
balance.
their feelings. You don't want to put your pain on them because they're already, like you said, dealing with their own stuff. So it, I want to, and all of us have egos, and we want to feel like we are the best that we can be, no matter at any given time. And when somebody is frustrated with you, it's not helpful.
No, no. Well, that's, you know, it's good to hear about the journey and that you go in and out of it. Um, what is one or two things that you've learned in the past few years with kind of the dump of losses and grief, not only about health, but, you know, with people around you? Any lessons that pop out at you?
Well, I think that we as humans, we pretty much feel when you're in middle age or younger, when you're younger, you feel like you're invincible. I think at this point in my life, I'm going to be turning 70 in August. I don't believe that anymore. I'm not invincible. And I believe that one of the challenges is accepting change. And we somehow think that life is going to be static and that we're just going to, is what we have is going to be what we're going to have next year, whatever. It's not true. And, there's a book that my staff and I went through years ago in some of our training about Who Moved the Cheese. It's a book, and it talks about change and the fact that you have to change where you're getting your cheese. You can't just go to the same place when the cheese is dried up and expect to find what you need at that point. You've got to be having some resiliency and some flexibility to be able to make things work for you, and that can change
Hmm.
that can change quickly, and it can change dramatically.
Sure. Yeah, I know a word that keeps coming to me is adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Whatever life gives me that day, um, I need to, as proactively as I can, adapt to it and not just get grumpy about it.
Right,
You know,
right.
it's a challenge.
Well, there have been
Yeah,
days.
well, that's a good word.
I remember there was one day that I came home from work, and at work, I loved my job, I loved my career, but I'd had a really tough day at work. And I remember just telling Richard, I'm sorry, I just need to have my own space. And I just went into my bedroom and did not come back out. And sometimes I think we need to give ourselves and let the person know, if we have a partner or something, or a family member or whatever, let them know it's not about you. But I can't feel nice right now. I can't be nice right now. And so I just need to find my own space. And I think that's an important knowledge
Yeah,
of
it is.
withdrawing sometimes, not for a long length of time, because I think that can be dangerous too. But sometimes we just need our space
Mm.
to just be upset or
Yeah.
be sad or be angry or
Yeah. Give yourself grace and find some space.
Right.
That's very good advice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, um, I appreciate your story, Sandy, and I have watched you go through a lot, and you are a woman of hope and of positivity, and you always have a good word for other people.
Oh,
And that's just who you are. I think that we just had somebody on our podcast an hour ago who talked about being a great person.
yes.
And so you're one of my great people.
Oh, thank,
I appreciate you
thank,
and being very
thank you.
open about this. And this series really, you wanted to do it. This was your vision. And so I appreciate it. Um, I'm going to kind of go into my story now. I'm not really sure where I'm going to go, but um, probably, I don't think some of it started about 5 years ago. I had major back surgery, and part of it starts there. But before that, I was caregiving for my elderly mother, and I had very, very severe back issues, is why I had the surgery. And I was crippled and in pain most of the time. And I would say that was almost, at least 5, if not 8 years before my back surgery. So I had been in pain and bent over on a walker and crippled for many years. And the pain was excruciating, but I kept on working and teaching and, going puttering around with my little walker. And it was nice because it kept me busy. Um, and my mom was deteriorating, and she was just a handful. And I was not very good at proactively getting her into a home where she really, I had some good home health care for her, but I just kept not doing that. I should have done it sooner, but you do what you do. And
Right.
I'm not sure where denial was and all that, but I was very angry. And my anger really focused on her because she was kind of getting meaner and meaner. And,
Mhm.
and I was feeling bad and guilty and, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm thinking that some of my anger I put my focus on her and not so much myself. And um, then she died she died in 2014. So, it's been over 10 years. And so some of that went away, but it didn't go away right away. Where there was just some anger and resentment, and it was focused on her, even though it wasn't really about her. So I'm thinking that some of that was, why me, Lord? Why do I have to be crippled? Why do I
Right.
have to, be in such pain? And I think it sort of started then. But after my surgery, you go into surgery and you have all these hopes about what's going to happen.
Right.
And so I went into surgery, had complications, went into a nursing. This is right in the start of COVID, right? Went into a nursing home. I had to go in a nursing home in Everett because it was the only one open. And of course, we live in Tacoma. It's a long journey. Nobody could visit me anyway. I
Right.
went in there and, keep expecting that, I was going to be able to get up and walk. That was my expectation. And it didn't happen. And I went home, and we weren't expecting all the care that had to happen. So my poor husband, we had to get a bunch of equipment. We had to learn things that were far beyond any of our pay grade, you say. And so, real long process of healing at home, doing PT, nothing really working. And I kept, in my head, I kept visioning, yes, I'm going to walk. Yes, I'm going to walk. And it kept not happening. And it really frustrating. You know what I mean? Not being able to do what you think you should do. And then not that my husband would say I would be a burden, but putting the burden on him, and then trying to, think about it, this too much for him, and, all that kind of stuff is kind of a guilt of laying it on him. And
Right.
one of the things that pops up for me that was so true was there was some shame in admitting that I couldn't walk. You know, and I know that sounds so stupid, but you know what I mean? I didn't want to tell people, you know, I
When
can't come because, you know,
yeah,
it's pain to have to get me in the car, get me out of the car, you know,
yeah,
and the shame was there, and I'm not sure where to put the shame in the stages, but it was definitely there, and I think it still resides in me somewhat today. I'm getting better, and this series is helping me say, hey, this is where I am. I'm, you know, I can't walk, I can move around, but it just is hard to accept your new self, you know, and
yeah,
even to find the cheese wherever the hell the cheese went, you
right,
know.
right, right.
So that's kind of ongoing. And then the other part that haunts me all the time is, and I'm not sure what it is, but it just has to do with burdening my caregiver, burdening my husband with, you know, asking him to do more than he's already doing. You know, he's been taking
Right.
care of me for almost 5 years. And, you know, I don't know if it's guilt, but I worry about it. You know what I mean? That's a worry. And off and on, I move into acceptance of, all right, so what is my life going to look like if I'm in a wheelchair the rest of my life? You know what I mean? How can I adapt and, you know, make a productive life if I'm here all the time, you know? And
Mhm.
then this comes up all the time, and I'm sure it does for other people too, but other things happen too, you know. So a couple of months ago, I was going to the Y twice a week and swimming. I was walking 45 minutes to 2 hours a day with my walker. And all of a sudden, my right leg went out and I couldn't put weight on it anymore. And that was my good leg. And and so I'm going, okay. So then as I investigated that, I am getting ready to have knee surgery, you know, and well, you know, here I am. My good leg is going to be out of commission for a while. So what do we do? And, you know, so it took some planning to get that all in place. My husband needs knee surgery. He's hobbling around taking care of me. And the doctor said he wanted my knee surgery first because mine might collapse where Mike's, you know, isn't. And so it's just kind of like, okay, Lord. And I had a book years ago. I don't still have the book by Charles Swindoll called Three Steps Forward, Two Steps Back. And I just, you know, that seems to be my acceptance is that seems to be the story sometimes. You know,
Right.
it just keeps on heaping on, and you don't jump back into, well, I don't think I want to jump back into the way I was before my surgery, because the surgery gave me two things that were very positive. I no longer am in pain all the time, which is just a wonderful thing. And
Right.
then I'm a couple inches taller than I was because I'm straight. I wasn't straight then, I was
Yeah.
bent over.
Right.
And so those are very positive things. I'm very grateful for them because as much of a burden as it is to have to be in a wheelchair, being in pain all the time really does awful things to your brain. You know what I mean? So I'm glad to maybe I'll say I have my brain back. Other people might question that. But anyway,
Uh,
you know, and it's still a point that, you know, I get out a little. I don't get out as much as I'd like to. And part of that's because there's some shame involved in having to, you know, be disabled or
yeah.
whatever
Well, you
they say. Apologies
the
for
word
that. Yeah.
popping in my mind is embarrassed. I've heard my husband say that's
Yeah.
embarrassing.
Embarrassed. Yeah. And then the other thing is, and I don't know why nobody cares, but you do care. And then the other thing is sometimes about getting out and about is I don't want to burden Mike with one more thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's got enough to do, and I know he would poo poo that, but it's just the way I feel.
Right. Right.
And so it's just interesting. and I try to be a real upbeat person. And I know you must experience this too. Being a real, I don't know, Pollyanna, Susie Cream Cheese type of person. I've always been that way. But I know
Yeah.
there's people that are my friends that are going through stuff too, and I know they're rolling their eyes, going, "Oh God, there she goes again," with with the positivity. But it is just who I am. I've been that way since high school.
Right.
I have been. I'm glad I am, but it's still, you have to consciously get up in the morning and find something to be joyful about.
Right.
It's a default. I've been
Yeah.
journaling now since, I don't know when we finished that one book we were reading, Sandy, about prayer. And the guy suggested journaling. And I've been journaling now since we ended that book, which I think was probably last fall. And it is very helpful. I do have kind of I journal for 5 minutes, and it's just helpful. And it's
Mm.
pointing that first sentence I write has to be about what I'm choosing to be joyful about,
Right. Right.
because it would be really easy to jump into that depression place. And I had to climb out of that once. I know a couple of, I think it was last summer, I told my doctor I wanted to, um, see a therapist, and she gave me the number of an online gal. And I did that probably for probably 3 or 4 months, and it was very helpful. And it was cute though. I can't take off this coaching hat. I was telling her all the tools I have that I work with other people on, and she goes, "Well, those are good tools. Use them yourself." I mean, and I hear that all the time too. I'm really good at advising other people what to do and not do it myself. But anyway, yeah, it was really hard for me to accept help from someone like that. I don't know why. I think it's probably the age we grew up in. And
Well, you think
but
you should have all the you think you should have all the answers, but we don't.
yeah, yeah. And then the other piece was how it showed up. I would be fine in the morning, and I'm a morning person, until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then when I have my role in fixing dinner, and I would just get so bitchy. You know what I mean? From 3 to 6, I would
Yeah.
just be, and I wasn't doing it to anyone but myself. I was just so negative. And that's when
Right.
I said, no, I need to talk to someone other than friends, burdening friends or whatever.
Yeah.
And it helped. It did help to talk to somebody and get it out. But that was sort of how depression, and it was all kind of connected with, the pain and taking care of my mom. And you know what I mean? It was all intertwined with that. A kind of a why me, Lord? Why did I have to go through this? But I
Yeah.
know
Well, and
there's,
you keep telling yourself you recognize that this is not the person you want to be, and
right.
so then you trying to figure out, well, how can I be back to who I consider myself to be,
Yeah.
right?
Recognize myself. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'll tell you, starting this podcast has really helped. You know what I mean? It's shifted my focus. I've had to learn new things and meeting new people. And now I'm so excited to start this series because I know there's people that
Right.
will come on the bridge and share their stories, and we'll just
Right.
become a community of caring people. You know what I mean? And
That's right.
yeah. So
Well, I kind of
I
feel like our whole thing was God led, because it was like it was a thought that popped into our minds, and we've just been taking it a day at a
yeah.
time, and I think it's a God thing. It was something that we felt,
Absolutely.
both of us felt impressed to do.
Absolutely. And we've learned so much, and you know, the one thing that surprises me is that I've become a recruiter recruiting people that I don't even know to come on. I didn't know that was in me. I guess I'm much more of a marketer than I knew. But
Right.
it's fun. But it's fun to get to know people and to use our gifts in positive ways. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
so anything we're missing that we want to talk to people about before we close?
Well, I think in everything with life, there has to be balance. And you can be an extremist one way or the other, but I don't think it's helpful. Finding your balance, finding the core of who you are, and uh, accepting that you're going to be going through some of this stuff. And you may not, like I said, go through all the different stages of it. But, there's a lot of things that happen in life. I was even thinking about financial trauma and stuff. That's another thing that people go through. And where do you pick up the ashes and start over again? How do you get onto the other side of that after you've done the grieving? And I guess one of the things I would say is, don't be surprised if you go through the cycle again. I think we kind of feel like we want a finished product. Okay, so this is what I've done. I've gone through these things. Now it should be done, and I should be over this and go forward on with life. And I think that's a misnomer. I
Yeah.
believe that um, it's not just a one and done.
No,
It was
and
interesting because I just watched a movie. So I watched a movie yesterday. It's an old movie from the 80s. It was with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson. It was called Heartburn. And I didn't think I had watched it years and years ago, but it was talking about marriage and some of the things that happened in this storyline. And it really brought out emotion that I had not even thought about for a long time, because I felt like I was healed, and this is I'm past this and this kind of thing. And it was interesting to have some of that arise in my spirit again. And I,
yeah,
I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think sometimes it's just a reminder of where I've been and where I've come from that point in my life, and who I
yeah.
who I am as a person now.
And you need to, every now and then you do need to reprocess it. It
Right.
comes up for a reason, and it's not a bad thing. You're right.
Right.
Um, when you were talking about other types of losses, um, what's jumping out at me is like if you did either get fired from a job or you left under circumstances that weren't so good, how can you take that anger and consciously forgive that person
Mm.
and not really work on not taking it personally? We just had a young man, my grandson, in fact, on the podcast before doing this, and he reminded us that don't take things personally, you know,
Right.
let it roll off your back, because that anger doesn't help you. I think I read a quote yesterday. I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, but it said, anger is like taking poison and expecting it to kill the other person.
Right. Right. Right.
You take it on yourself and it doesn't do you any good.
Yeah.
And
Forgiving is a big part of the process, I think, to be
yeah,
able to heal.
really letting go of it. Yeah. So, Sandy,
Well,
are we ready to do our takeaways?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to bounce in here too is that you can even change of employment can be a positive thing, as far as you're either getting a better job or whatever. So it can even be a positive, but they're still grieving for what you're leaving behind.
Hmm.
And I think that's a reality.
Hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
emptiness syndrome. You spent your
Hmm.
life raising your kids. They don't need you like they needed you before. That can be a grieving process. So there's just, I think we had new chapters of life, though it's a good thing. You're going to have some freedoms that you haven't had before. It's a mixed bag. It's not
Yeah.
all one or the other.
No, and it certainly isn't what you expect. I
Right.
want to give a short story about loss when it comes to your body. Most people know Tiger Woods, and he's been through a lot of surgeries and, not being able to golf anymore because of his injuries. But he had a golf coach, I think, talk to him, and they came up with Tiger Woods apparently came up with this, and he says it to himself every morning. And he says, "Okay, body, what do you have for me today?" And am I going to be able to walk that golf course, or am I going to not? And so being aware of that, and just it is what it is. I get to be alive today, and I get to do what my body tells me to do, and I'm not gonna feel bad about it. That's what
Right.
I have to work on. So
Right.
so go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one thing too that helps us when we're dealing with the grieving process is seeing somebody else, being a blessing to somebody else in the process. When you're hurting, when you're in pain, emotionally, physically, whatever, if you can be a blessing to someone else, I think there's some
Mhm.
healing that happens in that too. You're taking yourself out
Absolutely.
of your own world and seeing somebody else in their world and saying, what can I do for that
Right.
person?
Right. And I heard a podcast last night, and I don't know who to give credit to because I don't remember who it was, but basically this guy was saying there in communities like Al-Anon and AA, you come in there and you pretty much instantly form community with that group, and you're
Right.
from all different backgrounds. And he said there is no addiction or um, mental health issues when you have a community to connect to. Humans need other humans. And
Right.
so, I know there seems to be such a mental health crisis these days, but if you can um, find a tribe that you belong to
Right.
and connect with them, and let them just be there, and let them be
Right.
there. And it doesn't mean you have to whine or complain, but it fills a need that nothing else fills. So,
Yeah. But
all right.
like you said, being transparent is important. I think we
Mhm.
shy away from that because we don't want to burden other people. But like you said, part of that is acknowledgement and being able to be real.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. All right. Takeaway from today's conversation, Sandy, what you got?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing other people's stories and seeing the redemption that happens, throughout the process, because I think it is a step by step thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate this conversation, and hoping that our stories um, ignite in others the willingness to come on the bridge and just have a conversation, whatever you're in, and just tell us how you're processing. And we really appreciate you guys that come on the bridge with us every day. So thank you very much, and Sandy, I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Sue.